Welcome to Lecture 3. This one is Empires of the Atlantic World. And in this one, we are going to be looking at some of the other empires that will have a presence mostly in North America, particularly the French, the Dutch, and later, of course, the English. So the first thing we're going to look at is I mentioned empires of the Atlantic world. The first thing we have to discuss is what is the Atlantic world? So the Atlantic world is a geopolitical concept that was adopted by historians in around the 1980s. And what it is an idea of viewing this early American history not just with a sole focus on the land that would later become the continental United States. So trying to look at early US history beyond just a laser tight focus on the East Coast of North America, where we would have some early English settlements. Trying to look at it at a wider, bigger picture and make it more of a global history. So the Atlantic world is an idea of looking at early US history through the lens of global studies, and it's a way to make it more complete. I always think of the Atlantic world as when you're looking at early US history, you're not just looking at North America, you're looking at everything the Atlantic Ocean touches. So we're thinking about Europe, Africa, North and South America, all of that. And mostly it's because if you only focus on continental North America, you lose a lot of the picture, you lose a lot of the story of early American history, early US history. And a lot of it is because there's still important stuff going on, particularly in Europe, that's going to influence settlement in North America. So it's keeping this in mind. And it's also, the Atlantic world is also a useful geopolitical concept because it helps remind us as historians that the Atlantic world, the Atlantic Ocean, is not a barrier. It is a conveyor of connectivity. It is a source of connection. It connects Europe and Africa to North and South America. It connects the Americas to one another. It connects them all. It facilitates that Columbian exchange, that movement. And it's going to be market demands and politics that go on in Europe, Asia, and Africa that are going to have a really outsized effect on North America. So it's important to remember that if we have too strong of political boundaries in place, we're going to lose a lot of the story. So when I say Atlantic world, it is this kind of this map. It's a focus on history where we're looking beyond North America, trying to include Europe more in the story, Africa more in the story, South America more in the story. And it's going to help us see that when settlers arrive in North America, they're not isolated there. They are connected to a larger world, a global economy, and that's going to affect what goes on the continent. So, quiz question number one, what is the Atlantic world? And keep the Atlantic world in mind because we'll talk a lot about global market economy demands and fun stuff like that to explain some of the stuff going on here. So, other empires, how does the Atlantic world convey them to North America? What are they doing here? We know the Spanish were a heavy presence in South America, the Caribbean, and the American Southwest. But let's look at some of the other places, the other empires. One of them we're going to start out with is the French. And the French end up mostly in what's now Canada, that part of North America, because they were looking for a Northwest Passage. And a Northwest Passage is a route where they kind of want to follow and do what Columbus had tried to do. They're going to want to try to get to Asia by skirting around the northern part of North America. So their idea was, okay, Columbus had a good idea. Sail west to get east. You'll go all the way around the globe. There's an ocean route to Asia. There happen to be some continents in the way, okay, but that's not going to stop us. They're still determined to find a way to have an ocean route to Asia. And the French are determined to do this because the reason they want to find this Northwest Passage, this route to Asia, is because they want to do trading there too. They want to initiate trade with that continent. They want to become wealthy, and they really want to discover this Northwest Passage or discover a passage to Asia because they're hoping that if they do, they can market that. They can make it their own. They can charge people to use it. They can, make maps of it. They can really have something that would make them, it would be very lucrative for the French. So they're hoping that this will be their big discovery, their big accomplishment will be a Northwest Passage or a Northern Passage. And the French are thinking, well, there's a big continent in the way, but maybe we can just go over it. And they try. They try very hard. It's very difficult. It's frozen like 90% of the year. It's technically possible, but only very limited times of the year, and most of it is just covered in ice. So the French are never really very successful at this. They never really get through. The boats of the time are not cutters. They're not meant to be like those big ice chipper things that go through. They're not technologically cut out to do it. So the French are kind of forced to accept Canada as a bit of a consolation prize. They're thinking, well, we can't get past it, we'll colonize it. So they do, and the French end up colonizing a lot of Canada. One of them is Verrazano. He was an explorer in the 1520s. He explored for the French king. He was another Italian explorer. He ends up kind of around the New York City area. They were trying all these different ways to try to cut through North America. A big one, though, was 1534. The French explorer Jacques Cartier ends up mapping a lot of the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and he's the one that officially claims Canada for France, and it becomes a French colony. So, question number two, why did the French want to find a Northwest Passage to Asia? So, the French claim Canada and much of what's now the United States for themselves. They call their colony in North America really creatively. They pick the most creative name ever. They call it New France and decide that this is going to be where they are going to try to make some money. They're not finding that Northwest Passage. It's not going to come through that. They need something. So New France, very creative, ends up being quite a bit of territory. As you can see here, it is quite a big swath. All of that blue there is considered an extension of France. That is French Canada, stretching all the way down to what's now Louisiana, the state of Louisiana, and into the Gulf. So, French claim this, and in 1608, one of the larger cities in New France is established by Samuel de Champlain. He founds Quebec, which is up there, kind of a little northern of New York. And even though they have a massive amount of territory, you can see huge swath here. There's a very low number of French settlers in the area. There are not tens and tens of thousands that come over. There's not millions and millions of French colonists that come to populate this area of New France. And there are several reasons why. Part of it is because one of the first reasons is that there was actually a very low population of French in the globally at the time. France did not have a massive population. It didn't have an overflow of population like some countries did, mostly because France was still recovering from the bubonic plague. They were just a sparsely populated country, and the French crown, the French king, had no interest in in dispersing the French population into a continent that a lot of people hadn't really ever visited. So he didn't want to weaken the power of France at home by sending them all out into this frigid wasteland of Canada. And frigid wasteland segues nicely into the next reason why there were so few French settlers, and that's because there was not a lot of appealing prospects to settle in French Canada. Some of the big cities like Quebec, they're cold. They're a little barren. It's not the most attractive prospect. There's nothing really that makes people want to risk everything to cross the Atlantic Ocean, give up everything they know in Europe, and settle there. They're also getting some bad reports about interactions with Native Americans. There's reports that um, that there's some hostility there, or that if there's a lot of difficulty in navigating diplomatic relations with them. It just sounds like a challenge a lot of French settlers are not willing to make. They don't want to cross the Atlantic and deal with all of this. There's also kind of a concern amongst French nobility that if we send way too many people over, we're going to turn into, there's going to be another black legend up there. Remember the black legend of the Spanish and their poor treatment? The concern is that if you have too many French around, they're going to start getting cruel like the Spanish. If you keep the numbers low, there's less chances of hostile encounters here. So that is quiz question number three. Why were there so few French settlers in New France in Canada? Why weren't there a lot of French settlers here? But the French that are there try to make money in something that a lot of countries will try to make money with, and that is going to be the fur trade. They are going to harvest mostly beaver pelts, and they will end up relying on beaver and otter pelts to make money and rely on connections to various indigenous societies in order to facilitate that trade because a lot of the French population doesn't have the best lay of the land, so they're going to rely on people that are very knowledgeable about the natural landscape and about the local wildlife in order to help them trap and get furs and then sell them. Now, this is something that some historians see as being kind of a middle ground, where a lot of times the story is that there is a differential in power between indigenous societies and European colonists. And it's something that it's always the power is always unbalanced in favor of the Europeans, where they were always the strong conquering force. But with the fur trade, it's more of an even playing field where they are relying on the good graces of Native Americans to help them find these critters and hunt them down. And they are at their mercy for being able to hunt and being able to use the land for their own purposes. So the area of North America, because of that lower European population and because of their reliance on native skill and native knowledge, it allows for a more equitable relationship going on between these two populations. So that will say, let's see, that will be quiz question number four. What was the main type of trading that the French did with indigenous populations in North America? The Dutch, they're also at it too. They're all over the place. The Dutch are going to want to explore as well. They want in on this. And because of that, they are going to form a company called the Dutch East India Company. And that is a stock company where people can invest in that and fund exploration. They can fund explorers going out looking around. And the reason why they formed the Dutch East India Company, the goal of the Dutch East India Company is the goal of almost every other exploration or explorer company out there to find a passage to Asia. They all want to get to Asia. Notice like North America is not super popular. They're not thinking, oh, this is a great place to go. It's kind of like all right, if we can't get there, we'll just colonize it. The Dutch really want to get to Asia as well. They want to get to Asia and they want to get to India. They want to get to the Indian subcontinent, hence the phrase East India Company in it. They're really hoping to tap into the trade in India and help and have that help bolster the Dutch economy. They're really desirous of trade with India and they want to be able to fund that. So they have their own company to do so because it's very costly to do this. So they're thinking if they form a company and there's lots of investors, lots of people pooling their money, and then they could get a profit if anybody finds anything good, that's going to help facilitate the exploration more so than if you just have to rely on like one or two adventurous rich guys who want to go out there and do it. You can get people to hire sailors who know what they're doing and hire traders and people with language skills and scientific navigational skills to go out and do this. So they're thinking if we form a company, it's better than just sending a lone mariner and his crew out there and hoping for the best. So they form the Dutch East India Company, hoping to find a route to Asia. They end up knocking into North America just like everybody else, and they're trying to scoot their way through it. Still can't really find that elusive Northwest Passage, but they make some inroads and they start making some claims for themselves. In 1609, Henry Hudson goes out exploring for the Dutch. He is an Englishman, but he's hired by the Dutch East India Company because he seems pretty competent. They like him. Hudson thinks he's like really excited for a moment there. He thinks like, I got it. He's gonna find the river that cuts through North America and leads him to Asia, but it turns out to just like bring him to Albany. And it's the Hudson River. That's 1609. Tries again in the 1610s, 1610 1611. He thinks he found it again, but it turns out he just like found Canada again. And he ends up in the Hudson Bay. So he keeps trying to cut across North America, is unsuccessful every time, but he does land in spots and end up claiming it for the Dutch. In 1614, he claims Fort Orange for the Dutch, which is a fur trading post, which is where Albany is now. So, quiz question five. What was the goal of the Dutch East India Company? All right, what are the Dutch up to? What are they doing? They're going to have a colony of their own. They're going to claim land in North America, as many empires are doing. You know, the Spanish have claimed territory in the Americas, the French have claimed territory, the Dutch are also claiming territory, and they're going to call their colonial holding another awesomely unique name because they're the Netherlands. This is New Netherland. It's new. It's there. It's North America. And a lot of where the Dutch are going to predominantly settle is going to be areas I think we're pretty familiar with, especially, you know, if you're a New Yorker like me, we know New York. It's a lot of it old Dutch terms. They're the ones that colonize Long Island, New York City, New Jersey, all the way up the Hudson and up towards Albany, Capital District. The Dutch, when they form New Netherland, their colony, their colonial possession in North America, most of their trading is going to be fur. It's going to be that's what they're going to be making money on. That's why they want to be here, mostly is for the fur trade. That's where the money is at. Interestingly enough, the reason it's so lucrative to like get beaver pelts during this time is because it's really cold and beaver fur is awesomely good at holding in heat and it's water resistant. So if you can like hunt and trap a beaver and get its fur and make a hat out of it, that hat is going to be great. So they like beaver fur. The Dutch make a lot of settlements near fur trading posts. One of them is going to be Beaverwick, which is the city that eventually turns into Albany. So they have all of their stuff is all about fur trade. That's very attractive. That attracts colonists to the region, and they are going to want to come there for that. But they're also going to be attracted to the Dutch settlements like Beaverwick and like New Amsterdam, which is New York City, because the Dutch are very religiously tolerant. They don't want you to come and like start trying to change everybody and celebrate what you are, but if you're Jewish or if you're a Quaker, you're Catholic or whatever it is that you are, you can come hang out in the Dutch settlement. They're not going to persecute you. You know, you can do it behind closed doors, but nobody really cares what you get up to. And that makes it pretty attractive for a lot of people, even though it's a kind of a cold climate. I mean, you know, if you've ever been to Albany in the winter, it's not that cool. It's very cold up there. The religious toleration helps try to bring more people in, and the Dutch are going to be very desirous of having more settlers, of the reason why we'll talk about in a minute. But that is the next quiz question. That is, I think we're up to, I'm trying to have my cheat sheet over here, that I'm always peeking at. That is number 6. What attracted colonists to the Dutch settlements in North America? So the Dutch are trying to attract more people to their settlements because they want to. protect the fur trade. They're really scared that it's so lucrative. They're terrified that the Spanish or the English are going to come and steal their settlements. They're going to take them over, kick the Dutch out, and then they're going to get that lucrative fur trade. That's kind of why New Amsterdam, New York City is where it is. That was the protector of Beaverwick, of Albany. The reason that they wanted to settle down there, where New York City is by the bay, is because they were hoping that having a strong Dutch presence there would discourage pirates and other settlers from trying to sneak up the Hudson River and take over Beaverwick or take over Albany. So they want a strong, large population there to fight off any incursions into their trade territory. So they want to attract more people to grow crops, to protect the fur trade, to really settle it and make it and make their and really stake their claim on it. They're thinking, well, people can kind of just kick us out if there's only a couple dozen Dutch people wandering around here. There's hundreds and thousands of them, and it's going to be a lot harder to take it over. They're also hoping to have them grow crops because they want this to make more money. You need more people there to grow crops and sell stuff on that Atlantic market and turn a profit for the Netherlands there. And the way that they try to attract people is, I said the fur trade, trying to make money on that, religious toleration. Another reason, another way they try to attract settlers is by promising them free land and really cheap livestock if you come settle here and work for 6 years. So that's pretty attractive to a lot of people. This idea that, oh wow, if I settle in New Netherland, I will get free land and some livestock after working for 6 years on the land. That sounds pretty good. A lot of people want free land. That sounds awesome. However, the Dutch are kind of overstepping their bounds with this. They bring in a lot more people, which, okay, you promise them free land, you have to give it to them after a while. They're taking more land than they have actual access to and actual right to. They end up taking land that belongs to the Delaware or Lenape indigenous group, and the Lenape are understandably not very happy about this Dutch incursion onto their land. It ends up launching into a bit of a war because the Dutch settlers have all of these, they're taking land and they have all this livestock and they don't really fence it in. The Dutch kind of let their pigs and stuff run hither and thither, and the pigs destroy a lot of the Lenape's crops. The Lenape were known for killing the pigs once they got into their crops, and the Dutch would get really mad at them for killing their pigs, and then they end up going to war over it. It ends up being called the Pig War, also known as Kift's War, after the Dutch governor Willem Kift. And it ends up being pretty deadly. It's a several year conflict between the Lenape and the Dutch over land access and pigs. And it's pretty bloody. It's several years, about 1,000 Lenape and over 200 colonists are killed in the course of this. And it really dissuades the Dutch from continuing their presence in the New World. They are just really discouraged by and disheartened by how difficult it is to maintain themselves there. They end up eventually kind of capitulating to the English once the English come by and want to take it over. So let's see. This is quiz question 7. Why did the Dutch want to attract more settlers to their colonies in the New World, and what problems occurred because of that? All right, we talked about the English, we brought them in a little bit, but what's interesting about English settlement is even though we kind of know where this story goes, I'm currently speaking English right now, and there's a reason for that. England becomes the dominant colony, the dominant empire in North America, but they didn't start out that way. They were actually the last. They were slow on the uptake. They did not end up getting there, getting a foothold in any of the New World for quite some time. They're kind of one of the last settlers, one of the last settlement groups to end up having a presence there. They're late. England is super late. And part of the reason why England is so late to colonizing the Americas is because they had a lot of their own problems to deal with first. One of them is that they faced a lot of internal religious strife, decades of it. There was a lot of religious infighting amongst the English. And part of it was because England had been Catholic for a while, but then I told you about the Protestant Reformation. With that, a lot of English people wanted to become Protestant. They wanted to break away from the Catholic Church and adopt Protestantism. They agreed that, for a lot of them agreed, they felt that Catholicism was too corrupt, too luxurious. It was not it was not the type of religion they wanted to practice. And King Henry VIII would agree with that. He said, I want England to be Protestant. And he establishes something known as the Anglican Church, which is the Protestant Church of England, and basically just declares the country Protestant. A lot of Catholic English people are not happy with that, and dozens of years of war result. So they're a little busy with that. They're also going to be really busy conquering Ireland. And they call them the Wild Irish. They didn't like the fact that the Irish were very Catholic. They were kind of Catholic holdouts and were determined to subdue them. They felt that they were very barbaric, sometimes pagan still, or practice pagan religions. And were very determined to kind of bring them under the yoke of England, if you will. And a lot of time and energy and effort went into that, into trying to deal with the Irish. So they're a little more focused on these issues than they are with colonizing the New World. So let's see. Quiz question number 8. Why was there so much religious strife in England at this time? But they do get out there. Don't count them out fully. They want in on this too. They're hearing all this great stuff about what these other empires are finding once they cross the Atlantic in this new world. The Spanish become filthily rich with gold and silver. The French are just pillaging fur all over the place. So are the Dutch. Everybody else is doing well. England doesn't want to be left out. So they decide that they're going to try to make their own colony. They're going to strike out and do it. So in 1585, an English nobleman named Sir Walter Raleigh decides he is going to try to get this ball rolling here. He's not going to be left out. And sends 100 settlers to try to get a foothold for England on Roanoke Island, which is off the coast of present-day North Carolina. So he sends the colonists there. He's hoping that this will be a good location. It's kind of right in the heart of things. Maybe they can interrupt Spanish shipping or maybe there'll be gold there. Who knows? It's always nice to hope. Um, and decides that, all right, we're gonna settle right here. They set the 100 people down and then they boogie back to England and say, well, let us know how it goes. Have fun. Don't hear anything from them for a while. That's concerning. No word from them. And in 1590, they decide, maybe we should check on them. We haven't heard from them in a while. Are they okay? They're not okay. They're gone. In 1590, a group of English sailors in the area decide maybe we should see if everybody's okay there. When they go there, they discover that the colony has been completely abandoned. All 100 people, everything they were there with is totally gone. There's not a sign of them. They're just vanished. The only clue left behind, as this etching shows, was a carving on a tree that said Croatoan. And the English sailors look at this and they think, okay, either they were attacked and killed by the Croatoan people, which is a term for a language group that was in the area. They were either attacked and killed by them, or maybe they went off and joined them because they're certainly not alive here. It's not a very promising start to just have 100 people vanish and everything with them. So the English kind of they're dragging their feet still. They're like, well, that didn't work out. So who wants to go back? And there's not a lot of hands going up in the air to try again with that one. So the Roanoke colony is abandoned. It's kind of forgotten about. And if you ever are like awake in midnight or something, and you turn on the History Channel, I guarantee you're going to find some weird conspiracy documentary about what happened to the lost colony of Roanoke. But that's exactly what happens to it. It's just lost. It's abandoned. Nobody knows what happened to it, but it is not populated anymore. It's not viable. It is abandoned and gone, and it is considered kind of a loss for England that this didn't work out. Quiz question number 9. What happened to the Roanoke colony? So they're discouraged by Roanoke, but they're not totally thrown off the trail here of colonizing the New World. Mostly because they don't really feel like they have a choice. There is a huge population problem in England, and they need something to do with them. It's exacerbated by something known as the enclosure movement. And this is when a lot of land that used to be considered commons, where anybody, if you didn't own land, you could go and use the common land to graze your animals or grow crops and help yourself. There were a lot of commons in England. It was a really ancient tradition where big wealthy landowners would allow people who didn't have land to use it to better themselves, or at least sustain themselves if they weren't going to better themselves, that they could, graze a goat and milk a cow using the common land. That had been in place for hundreds and hundreds of years in England. But with that Atlantic world market opening, and now suddenly there's a lot more demands for stuff. People need um, food and crops. They need to feed their enslaved populations in the Caribbean. There's a huge demand across the Atlantic for food and for wool from sheep for clothing. Where are they going to get it from? These big landowners and old aristocratic families in England, they don't want to let poor people graze their animals on that land. They're going to want to enclose it, fence it off, put shrubs around it like this picture shows, and use it privately. Now, those people that had relied for generations on common land have nothing. They can't afford to buy anything. They can't afford to rent anything. Nobody wants to rent it to them. It's more lucrative to just grow stuff on it yourself. They have nowhere to go. All of the land in England has been enclosed. You are not getting by on the charity of a big landowner anymore. It has been enclosed to make a profit on. So that enclosure movement means that now there are a lot of landless vagrants, people that have no way to sustain themselves, they have no way to make ends meet, they have really no prospects. And they end up just kind of wandering around. They end up going to big cities like London and getting in trouble. They end up in poorhouses. And now the nation has this surplus population that they're really not quite sure what to do with. Hmm. Sending them across the Atlantic Ocean to try to make a colony sounds like a pretty appealing prospect. Hey, it's a safety valve. It's a way to get rid of them. Go away. Better yourself in North America. There's plenty of land there. It sounds kind of cruel. It's like, all right, we're just gonna flush these people across the Atlantic and hope they make it. If it does, great. If not, well, they're gone. But it's pretty appealing to a lot of colonists as well, a lot of people that end up going across the Atlantic because they're thinking, well, there's nothing for me in England, but there's free land and job prospects and the ability to maybe become wealthy myself over there. That's better than anything that's offered in England. It's better than anything Europe has to offer. So a lot of them are pretty glad for the opportunity. And that's kind of when that whole concept of America being a land of opportunity, a land to start over and better yourself, that's when that really starts to have its very first its bits of infancy there. It's going to grow out of this idea where you have nowhere to turn where you are, so America is going to be this golden opportunity to make yourself better. So, final quiz question number 10. Why did the enclosure movement lead to more people looking for land? So, the next lecture is going to be on a lot more about English settlements because this is when we're going to start tracing the origins of the United States. It is going to be the English colonists that will end up forming the United States.